All right, so today we're going deep on a true classic in the business world.
Oh yeah, this one's a big one.
It is strategic selling. The full title is Strategic Selling, the unique sales system proven successful by America's best companies.
I feel like everybody who's anybody in sales has at least heard of this one.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
it's by Miller, Heimann, and Tuleja.
And it all started way back at Hewlett-Packard, like, think 1977.
Wow, yeah, that's a fun part
So,
at the back.
quite a while ago, but still so relevant.
Absolutely.
So,
So for anyone listening, think of this as your cheat sheet
exactly.
to really understanding, the core concepts of strategic selling.
Yeah.
Whether you're like prepping for a big meeting or, just trying to figure out how these like powerhouse sales teams operate.
Yeah, or if you're just like me,
All right.
curious about how to really just be persuasive. Yeah.
Persuasion, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're going to break it all down, and you don't have to wade through, all those pages yourself.
You got us.
You got us.
We're your guides.
So what really stood out to me revisiting this book, the core idea is that strategic selling, it's not about being pushy. It's not about
It's not about tricks.
tricks. It's really about taking that outward focused approach.
Right.
Like deeply understanding your customer
Yes.
on like the company level and the individual level, and
Yeah.
then figuring out how to build these relationships that really create value for both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about that win-win.
Yeah, exactly. That classic win-win scenario. And what's so fascinating is that they start the book talking about this idea of future shock selling, which comes from Alvin Toffler.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they basically argue that all these like rapid changes happening in the marketplace in tech and like who your competitors are, even in how marketing works, demand a much more strategic and less reactive approach to selling.
Okay, so break down this future shock selling for me. What are they really saying there?
Basically, they're saying that you can't just rely on luck or just having a great personality. That might have worked, way back when.
Right.
But in today's world, and I think this was true even back then when they were
Right, it's a lot more complex.
way more complex. So you need to have, clearly defined steps in your sales process. You can't just wing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they talk about persistence too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I've heard stats about, how many times you actually have to reach out to someone before you actually close a deal,
It's crazy. It is crazy. Like they mentioned some research that found something like 80% of sales actually happen after the fifth contact or later.
Wow.
So
5 or more.
5 or more. And that's why having a solid strategy to keep you, engaged and moving forward is so key.
And they don't just focus on what you do externally. They talk about internal stuff too, right?
Yes.
Like analyzing your own processes.
Exactly. They say successful salespeople are really good at understanding and analyzing their own sales processes.
So it's not just about the customer.
Right.
It's about looking inward as well.
It's both. It's a balance.
So let's dive into, where all this strategic thinking starts. Chapter 3 is all about position. And I immediately think about, military strategy.
Yeah, that's a great analogy because that's exactly how they frame it in the book. Like if you think of a general, planning a big campaign, they have to understand their own forces.
Yeah.
They have to know where the enemy
Is
is.
the strengths and weaknesses. And
Strengths, weaknesses,
Yeah.
and their ultimate goals. So in sales, your position is basically where you stand with a specific customer and how that relates to a specific goal you have.
So how do you actually figure out your current position with a client? Where do you even start with that?
They recommend starting with what they call a changes list.
Okay.
And this is where you identify all the big changes that are happening in your industry, in your specific market, in your geographical area, even within your own company. And once you have that list, you go through each item and decide if it's an opportunity or a threat.
So just getting it all out there on paper.
Yeah, just lay it all up.
And
Then once you've got your changes list, you got to set a really clear sales objective for that particular customer.
Right.
And they say it should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
A SMART goal.
Exactly. A good old SMART goal. And really important, only focus on one main objective at a time.
Don't try to do too much at once.
No, keep it simple.
And they talk about this thing called the euphoria panic continuum.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
What is that? What's that all about?
So this is a tool to check yourself. Like, how are you really feeling about this specific sales situation?
Okay.
On one end, you have euphoria, where you're super comfortable, maybe a little too confident that things will work out.
Overconfident even.
Yeah, overconfident. And then on the other end is panic, where you're like full of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
The goal is to be somewhere in the middle,
Not too high, not too low.
Not too high, not too low.
Okay.
You want to have a realistic view of the situation.
Right.
So once you know where you are on that continuum, then you can start thinking about, maybe you need to adjust your approach.
Reposition yourself.
Reposition yourself. And that's where looking back at those external changes can help you figure out how to leverage them to reach your goal.
Got it. Okay, so that lays the foundation, and then they move on to these key elements.
Yes.
And the first one is buying influences.
And that.
Which makes sense, especially when you're talking about, big, complex deals.
Absolutely. Because usually it's not just one person.
It's ever just one person, is it?
Never just one person making the decision.
Especially in like a large organization.
Oh, yeah. So they break down these buying influences into 4 main roles.
Okay. Hit me with the first one.
The first one is the economic buyer.
Who is that? I feel like this is like the VIP you need to get to know.
Yeah, this is the person with the power to say yes or no to the whole deal. They control the budget.
So the one with the money.
The one with the money. They're focused on the bottom line. What's the cost? What's the return on investment?
Okay, so usually only one of these per sale, right?
Usually just one.
All right. Who's next?
Next up are the user buying influences.
So who are they?
These are the folks who are actually going to be using your product or service.
Okay.
Or at least supervising its use.
Day to day.
Day to day. They're the ones thinking, how is this going to affect my work?
And there can be a bunch of these, right?
Oh, yeah. You could have multiple user buying influences on a single sale.
Makes sense. Who's number 3?
Number 3 is the technical buying influence.
And they're all about the details.
Exactly. They're the ones who are checking if your product meets all the technical specs.
Okay.
They're like the gatekeepers, making sure everything's compatible and up to snuff.
Interesting.
And what's interesting is that they can often say no if you don't meet the specs.
But they can't necessarily say yes.
They don't usually have the final say. So
Interesting.
they can block you, but they can't always get you in.
Okay. And the fourth and final buying influence.
This one's crucial. This is the coach.
The coach? Okay, I like that.
Yeah. The coach is like your insider in the buying organization.
An inside man.
Your inside person, yeah. They give you the lowdown on the company, the other buying influences.
Okay.
They tell you what everyone's looking for, what their wins might be.
So they want you to succeed.
They want you to win the deal. They're on your team.
That is so valuable.
It is so valuable. So the book says you should always try to find at least one good coach for every sale.
That makes a lot of sense. Now I see here we also have logistical buying influences. What about them?
Yeah, so those are more common in consumer product sales.
Right.
They're the ones focused on the practical stuff, like,
The day-to-day operation.
Yeah, like shelf space, inventory management.
Pricing.
All the nitty-gritty of how the product actually gets to the customer and gets sold.
So for this deep dive, we're really focusing on the big 4 buying influences.
Yeah, for strategic selling, those are the main players.
Right. And the next key element you guys cover is red flags.
Yes.
Which I'm assuming means, figuring out where there might be some problems.
Yeah. Red flags are warning signs that something could go wrong or something's not quite right. But
they're not just negative, right?
They're not just negative. They're also opportunities to improve.
Right.
To adjust your strategy.
To get ahead of it.
To get ahead of it. Exactly.
So what are some specific examples of these red flag areas?
Let's see. So they talk about 5 main ones. First is critical information missing.
Okay.
So you're missing some key details about the deal or the customer or even their company.
Yeah, that's a big one. Not having all the info you need.
Yeah. Second is if any of the key buying influences are new to their job,
right,
they might not have all the context or the influence yet.
Right. They're still getting their feet wet.
Exactly. Third is uncertainty about information.
So maybe the data you have isn't totally reliable.
It could be unreliable, contradictory.
Well, you're just not sure.
Not totally sure.
Not totally sure.
Yeah.
Fourth is if you have any uncontacted buying influence, someone important that you haven't talked to yet.
Right. Someone with a stake in the decision.
Yeah. And finally, any reorganization within the buying company.
Oh, yeah. That can throw a wrench in things.
Big time.
Uh-huh.
Because that can change everything.
Priorities, budgets, decision makers.
Everything.
So when you spot one of these red flags, do you, freak out? What do you do?
No. You don't freak out. The whole point of spotting them early is so you can, adapt your strategy.
All right.
Ignoring them, that's what leads to trouble.
So you got to be proactive.
Proactive.
Yeah.
And they have this strategy called leverage from strength.
Okay.
So when you see a red flag, you either use your existing strengths to address it, or you figure out how to get the information you need to deal with it.
So it's about turning a potential negative into a positive. Exactly. You're turning a threat into an opportunity.
All right. Key element number 3, the 4 response modes.
Now, this is where we get into the psychology of the buyer.
Okay, this is interesting.
So they say that buyers are most open to change when they see a gap.
A gap between
Where they are now and where they want to be.
Okay.
They call this gap a discrepancy.
Discrepancy.
And this discrepancy leads to one of 2 main response modes.
What are those?
Growth mode or trouble mode.
Okay, let's start with growth mode. What's that all about?
So in growth mode, the buyer sees your proposal as a way to get even better.
So they're doing okay.
They're doing okay, but they're always looking to improve.
To grow.
To grow, to be more efficient, to get ahead of the competition.
So in this mode, they're more likely to buy.
Yeah, usually much more likely.
Okay, what about trouble mode?
Trouble mode is when there's a problem.
An actual crisis.
A crisis. A fire they need to put out.
All right.
So they're looking for a solution fast.
To get back on track.
To get back on track. They want to fix what's broken.
Okay, so it sounds like those 2 modes are, the ones you want to see as a salesperson?
Yeah, those are the ideal scenarios.
But what about the other 2?
Well, the other 2 are a bit trickier. There's even keel mode, where the buyer doesn't really see a need for change.
They're content with the status quo.
Yeah, they're comfortable. They don't see the gap.
So not a lot of urgency there.
Not a lot of urgency. And then there's overconfident mode, where the buyer thinks everything's amazing.
They're a little delusional.
A little delusional. They don't see any problems, and they don't want to change.
So tough to sell to.
Very tough. They're basically wearing blinders.
So the key here is to figure out which response mode each buying influence is in.
Absolutely.
And then tailor your approach accordingly.
Exactly. You got to speak their language. You got to understand their mindset.
Okay. Key element number 4, win results.
This is a good one.
This is where we get into that, win-win philosophy.
Exactly. So the book says a good sale one that's really successful and lasts.
Delivers value on 2 levels.
Okay.
You have the results, which are the concrete, measurable things the company gets,
Okay.
like increased revenue, cost savings, things like that.
Tangible stuff.
Tangible stuff. And then you have the wins, which are the individual benefits for each person involved in the decision.
So, like, what are some examples of results a company might be looking for?
Well, it could be, like I said, increased revenue or reduced costs.
Right.
Or maybe improved efficiency or a bigger market share.
So those are pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, you can usually measure them pretty easily.
But the wins, those seem a little more subjective.
Yeah. So a win is really about fulfilling a personal promise. Something that matters to that individual.
So like what? Give me some examples.
So maybe an executive wants their department to be more visible within the company.
Okay.
Or maybe a user just wants their job to be easier, less tedious.
Right.
Or a technical buyer wants to be known for implementing secure solutions.
Or a manager just wants to avoid a project failure that could hurt their career.
Right. So it's all about figuring out what makes each person tick.
Exactly. What's their motivation? What are they really hoping to achieve?
But there's a specific order to this, right? Like the results have to come first.
Yes. The company needs to see the value, the results for the whole organization before the individuals can get their wins.
Makes sense. If the company's not winning, no one's winning.
Right. You got to have a solid foundation.
So it's not just about schmoozing and promising people stuff.
No. You got to prove the business value.
But understanding those personal wins is still super important.
Oh, absolutely. Because those wins, those are what build loyalty. Those are what create advocates within the customer organization.
So you need both.
You need both results to get in the door, wins, to seal the deal and keep them coming back.
Now let's talk about getting to the right decision maker. Chapter 11 is all about strategies and tactics for getting to the economic buyer.
Yeah, the big cheese.
And we talked about them before. They're the ones who sign off on the money.
The ultimate decision maker.
Why is it so important to reach them directly?
Because without them, you're not going to get anywhere. You can have everyone else on board, but if the economic buyer doesn't say yes, it's a no-go.
Right.
The book actually gives this example of an airplane manufacturer.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
They spent all this time talking to pilots and generals, but they completely forgot about the king.
Who had the final say?
Who was the one actually paying for the planes? And the whole deal fell apart.
Yeah, that's a painful lesson.
So you got to know who the real decision maker is.
So how do you make sure you're aiming high enough in the organization?
They have this rule of thumb. Aim one level above where you think the economic buyer is. It's better to start high and work your way down.
And to waste time.
than to waste time with someone who can't actually say yes.
And what are some ways to actually figure out who the economic buyer is?
Well, the most direct way is to just ask.
Ask who?
The person you think might be the economic buyer.
Okay.
Just ask them, hey, who else needs to approve this?
Right. Cut to the chase.
Exactly. Another good way is to ask your coach.
Right. They would know.
They're your inside source. They usually have the intel.
And the least reliable way.
Just guessing based on titles or the company org chart?
Right. That's not always accurate.
Nope. People's roles can be fluid.
What about when you run into someone who's, like, blocking you from getting to the economic buyer?
Ah, the blocker.
How do you handle that?
Well, first, you got to figure out why they're blocking you.
What's their motivation?
What's their motivation? Often it's because they think they'll lose something if your deal goes through.
Okay.
So the book suggests 3 ways to deal with blockers. First, try to show them how they'll actually win if the sale happens.
Okay.
Second, try to carefully go around them.
So leverage other relationships you might have.
Exactly. And third, sometimes you might have to temporarily play nice with the blocker while you figure out another way to reach the economic buyer.
So you got to be strategic.
Very strategic. It's like a game of chess.
Okay, so once you actually get in front of the economic buyer, what should you be talking about?
So the book says economic buyers, they're always looking for information that will help them make better decisions.
Right, they want to be able to predict your future.
Exactly. They want to see the big picture. So your job is to give them valuable insights that help them with their long-term planning.
Okay, so you're not just pitching your product. You're giving them strategic advice.
You're a consultant.
And how do you build credibility with someone at that level?
Well, there are a few ways. One is what they call like rank selling, where you have executives from your company meet with the economic buyer.
So peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer. You can also highlight past successes, show them how you've helped other companies like theirs.
Show off your track record.
Yeah. You can offer executive briefings, give them high-level insights into their industry.
Okay.
And sometimes it helps to bring in a guru.
A guru. Like
an expert.
An expert, okay.
Either someone from your company or a well-known consultant.
So basically, you got to prove you know your stuff.
Yeah, you got to show them you're not just a salesperson, you're a trusted advisor.
And you shouldn't be bothering the economic buyer with every little thing, right?
No. Only contact them when you have a really good reason.
A strategic reason.
A strategic reason. Something that will actually help them achieve their goals.
Okay, so let's talk more about the coach.
The MVP.
Chapter 12 goes deep on your coach. A key to the other buying influences.
Right.
And we touched on this before, but why is it so important to cultivate a good coach relationship?
Because they're your eyes and ears inside the organization.
They give you the inside scoop.
The inside scoop. They tell you about the other buying influences, their roles, their priority, what they want, what their wins are.
Okay, so how do you find a good coach? What should you be looking for?
They have 3 criteria.
Okay, hit me.
First, they have to have credibility with you.
So you trust them.
You trust them. They've given you good advice in the past.
Right.
Second, they have to have credibility with the buying organization.
So they're respected within their own company.
They're influential. People listen to them.
Right.
And third, they have to have a genuine desire for your success.
They actually want you to win this deal.
They're rooting for you. They're on your team.
Okay, so are there people who might seem like a good coach but aren't really?
Oh, yeah. They call those false coaches.
Okay, so what are they like?
They might be friendly. They might be willing to talk to you, but they're missing one of those 3 key criteria.
Right.
So maybe they personally like your product, but they don't have any real influence in their company.
Or maybe they just like you as a person.
Yeah. So you got to be careful not to confuse friendliness with true coaching ability.
So how do you actually ask someone to be your coach?
Just be direct. Say, hey, I'm looking for some coaching.
Okay.
Explain that you value their expertise and you want their advice on how to navigate the sale.
And it's okay to have more than one coach, right?
Oh, yeah. The more the merrier.
More perspectives.
More perspectives, more insights.
Okay, now let's talk about managing your time when you've got multiple deals going on.
Yeah, that's the reality for most salespeople.
Chapters 13 and 14 talk about of time and money and this concept of the sales funnel.
Yes. The sales funnel is a great way to visualize and manage all your different sales objectives.
So how does it work?
Basically, it's a funnel divided into 3 sections.
Okay.
At the top, you have above the funnel.
Okay.
These are your initial leads, your potential customers.
But ones you're not sure about yet.
Yeah. So the main task here is to qualify these leads.
Figure out if they're worth pursuing.
Exactly. In the middle, you have in the funnel.
Okay.
These are the opportunities where you've already made contact with at least one buying influence.
So you're actively working on them.
You're in the game, and the focus here is to cover the bases.
So get a full understanding of the situation.
Learn everything you can about the decision, the stakeholders, the needs, the wins.
Leave no stone unturned.
Exactly. And then at the bottom, you have the best few.
The cream of the crop.
The ones you're most likely to close soon.
So you're putting all your energy into those.
Yeah. The focus here is to close the deal.
So a good salesperson needs to be able to do all three of those things.
Absolutely. You got to be able to qualify leads, cover the bases, and close deals.
If you neglect any one of those stages, you get what they call the roller coaster effect.
Oh, yeah, the dreaded roller coaster.
Where you have like a big surge in sales and then nothing.
Feast or famine.
And the sales funnel helps you avoid that. Right?
Exactly. Keeps a steady stream of opportunities flowing.
So how do you actually use the sales funnel in your work?
We start by taking all your sales objectives and putting them into the right category.
So above the funnel, in the funnel, best few.
Yeah. And then you test your sorting.
Test it how?
By asking yourself specific questions about each opportunity. Like if you think something's a best few, are you sure you've covered all the bases? Are you really confident you can close it soon?
So you're constantly evaluating.
Constantly evaluating.
And this is an ongoing process, right? Not just a one-time thing.
Oh, yeah. They recommend doing this like once a month.
So you can adjust your strategy as needed.
Yeah. This is the dynamic tool.
The last key element we got to cover is the ideal customer.
This is a really important concept.
Chapter 16 goes into this.
Yeah. It's all about figuring out who your perfect customer is.
So you can focus your energy on the right prospects.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
How do you actually define your ideal customer profile?
They have a really cool method. They say, look at your best customers and your worst customers.
Okay.
And compare them.
See what the differences are.
Yeah. What makes the good ones so good? What makes the bad ones so bad?
And then use those insights to create your ideal customer profile.
Exactly. It's like a blueprint for your perfect customer.
So once you have this ideal customer profile, how do you use it?
You use it as a guide when you're evaluating new opportunities.
Okay.
And even when you're looking at your existing customers.
To see if they're still a good fit.
Exactly. It helps you prioritize your efforts and make sure you're not wasting time on deals that are unlikely to be successful.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Chapter 18 is all about putting it all together into an action plan.
Yeah. This is where the rubber meets the road.
This is where you take all this strategic thinking and turn it into concrete steps.
Exactly. Your action plan is a list of specific actions you're going to take to achieve your sales objective.
So what are the key areas this plan should focus on?
They recommend focusing on 4 main areas. Your sales objective.
Okay.
The buying influences involved.
The response mode of each buyer.
Right.
And the win results you're aiming for.
Yeah. It's a very targeted plan, customized for each specific opportunity.
So how many actions should be on this list?
They say keep it short and sweet, like 4 or 5 key actions that you think will really move the needle.
Actions that are logical, urgent, and realistic.
Exactly. No fluff, just stuff that's going to make a difference.
Well, this has been a really amazing deep dive into strategic selling.
It's a classic for a reason.
And it's clear that this approach is about so much more than just closing deals.
It's about building relationships,
creating value,
solving problems,
and really understanding your customers.
It's a whole philosophy.
It is.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up for you, our listener, if you can grasp these core principles of strategic selling, you can really transform how you approach business.
You can move beyond luck and charisma.
It's about having a system, a process.
And being strategic.
It's about creating win-win outcomes where everyone benefits.
And as you think about everything we've discussed today, I want you to consider this.
Yeah.
Which of these strategic elements do you think could have the biggest impact on your own work?
What could you start implementing today to be more successful?
How could you use this knowledge to build stronger relationships and achieve better outcomes?
You know, what's really interesting is that so many of these principles apply not just to sales, but to any kind of persuasive endeavor.
Yeah, you can use this stuff in your personal life, too.
Absolutely. Whether you're negotiating a raise or trying to convince your partner to take that vacation you've been dreaming of.
It's all about understanding the other person's perspective and finding common ground.
And creating those win-win situations.
It's a powerful way to approach the world.
It really is.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's it for today's deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it and learned a thing or two.
And until next time, happy selling.
Happy selling, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.